of miles from the shores of Britain to the deserts of Syria. That was Hitler's greatest desire. It never happened. It didn't happen with Napoleon Bonaparte. It didn't happen with Mussolini. However, the Bible clearly tells us that in the final generation of this age, the Antichrist will rule the entire world for a limited time. How many years, church? 7. He doesn't realize that 7-year covenant that he will break with Israel will also bring his demise. And I'll share the ending with you. It's a movie spoiler, but the Antichrist and the false prophet, along with Satan, will all end up in the lake of fire. So, in our lifetime, it appears the Roman Empire is possibly being revived. Now, following the devastation of World War I and II that ravaged millions of Europe, began the first tentative steps toward establishing the formation of a superstate. In 1957, the Treaty of Rome created a new common market in Europe. 1957. Nationalism, which simply is a way of saying one nation above all others. And they and petty bureaucracies made the common market initially ineffective. And back in 1983, a magazine called The Economist, I had this copy at one time, ran an article on the 25th anniversary of the common market. The prospect at that time in 1983 was so depressing that the magazine's cover showed a tombstone engraved with the words European Economic Community. The fear was that without radical change, Europe was doomed to lose its international stature and power to America, Russia, and Japan, the big three. Who were they missing back in 1983? China. They were looked on as nothing special. The big three was America, Russia, and Japan. So do you think things have changed a little? Yes. The weak independent states of Europe could not guarantee the security of Europe on their own. Many felt individual European nations would never be strong enough to compete globally. Their only hope was to unite the incredible manpower, intelligence, and resources of the nations of Europe into a closely integrated supranational state, transcend national boundaries, authority, and interest. And since that article in 83, more than 27 nations have joined what we know today as the European Economic Community, also known as the ECC. So, understand this, that we know the revived Roman Empire, the whole old Roman Empire will come down to 10 kings that will rule over them all at the same time. That's never happened. The old Roman Empire was one emperor ruling at one time, not 10. When Nero ruled, nobody ruled with him. When Domitian ruled, nobody ruled with him. But these 10 kings will rule all at the same time. But then chapter 7 tells us there's an 11th horn, a little horn coming up, the Antichrist. He will uproot 3 of them, and he will become the world leader. He will become the king. He will become the prince that is coming, but the prince of darkness. Back in Daniel 2, I discussed this topic when I covered the 10 toes in the feet. So I don't want to cover all of that again. I'll just touch on a part of it. I shared at that time it's important to keep in mind that 10 kingdoms are to exist at one time, not through a period of several centuries. These 10 kingdoms will form one confederation. And that has never, ever happened, but it's going to. And again, class, I stress there's nothing in the past history of the kingdoms of Europe that answers this. No world empire has ever taken place in the entire old Roman Empire. Hitler thought he could, but he failed. Daniel's prophecy makes it clear that in the last days, some version of the old Roman Empire will be revived. Is it going to be the ECC? That I don't know for sure. But it has the potential that it could be because of the nations that have joined it so far, 27. So, since 83, more than 27 nations have joined the European Economic Community. And these nations are the ones that are in the area of the old Roman Empire. So, I want to just share a couple of those tonight. I have them by dates when they joined the ECC. I'm not going to get into that. I'm not going to give you the names that they were back in the old Roman Empire. I'll give you the names as they are tonight and just a handful of them. Italy, Netherlands, Germany, Ireland, France, Portugal, United Kingdom, Luxembourg, Belgium, Denmark, Spain, Greece, and Austria. These all belong to the ECC, and many more, a total of 27. European leaders are unaware of the ancient biblical prophecies that warn that the reuniting of the old Roman Empire, which Europe was a large part, will prepare the way for the rise of the Antichrist. May 14th, 1948. Does anybody know what that date represents? Vince? Israel became a nation again. May 14th, 1948. Do you know who the President of the United States was at the time who helped make that possible? Harry S. Truman. He's also the one that dropped the atomic bombs. He was FDR's vice president. Do we know who followed Harry Truman? Dwight Eisenhower. You're a sharp group, and I love this. We get a little history along the course here. But Harry Truman really fought for Israel to have a place of their own after they came out of the whole Holocaust. So I want you to understand this, class, without Israel becoming a nation again, the Antichrist would not be able to make a false peace covenant with Israel. If that did not happen in 1948, when the Antichrist comes on the scene, he could never make the false covenant with them because Israel wouldn't have a nation. Do you see how things fit together? And God isn't always in a hurry like we are. He has His own timetables. But it's incredible when you start to piece the puzzles of prophecy together and you say, God is so amazing. The God we serve is amazing. These prophecies are incredible. Now, there will be one world government and there will be one world ruler during the 7-year tribulation period, and that ruler is the prince to come, who is the prince of darkness. But again, thank God as Christians, we're not going to be here. We're not going to see him. The only time we're going to see him is when we come back with Christ at the second advent, when he's going to cast him into the lake of fire. Now, I want to talk about the third temple. It will be rebuilt Israel during the first 3.5 years of the 7-year tribulation period, because the Antichrist will help build that temple. So let me take a moment and discuss this. We know from Scripture that the third temple will yet be rebuilt. And this will happen even though it seems next to impossible at the present time due to the Dome of the Rock, Islam's third holiest shrine that's situated on the Temple Mount. Islam's other two holiest shrines are in Mecca and Medina in Saudi Arabia. And originally, the first and second temples for Israel were built on the Temple Mount, and now the Islamic Dome of the Rock resides there. The angel Gabriel said to Daniel, "Then he, Antichrist, shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, 7 years." Daniel 9:27. Notice the wording did not state with Israel, but with many. I believe this accurately reflects today's international scene. Right now, you have peace negotiations that involve the Arab nations and Israel. Any arrangements for the rebuilding of the third temple in the future will have to be made with many and not simply just with Israel. When God sent the angel Gabriel to Daniel over 2,500 years ago, God knew when the Antichrist came on the scene that the Temple Mount would have the Islamic Dome of the Rock on the Temple Mount. When my wife and I were in Israel, from the Mount of Olives, you could look straight across and see the Dome of the Rock. I always thought that was so cool. We're just sitting on the Mount of Olives and seeing where Solomon's temple stood, the second temple stood, and someday there'll be a fourth temple that Christ will build in Jerusalem. Therefore, Gabriel said he'll confirm a covenant. Again, we see the accuracy of prophecy from God's word. The ancient rabbis believed that the prophets Zechariah and Ezekiel foretold that the Messiah would restore the word they use is the Beth Amikdash, the holy temple in the last days. But Ezekiel, in the last section of the book of Ezekiel, is talking about the fourth temple, not the third temple by the Antichrist. Many Jewish commentators interpret the prophecies to teach that Messiah will build the third temple himself, but it will not be the Messiah, but the Antichrist will build the third temple. But again, it is the fourth temple that Messiah will build, and that is during the time of the 1,000-year reign in Jerusalem. It is the Antichrist who will build a third temple, and after 3.5 years will stand in the holy place and declare himself to be God. And that will signal to the Jews, this is wrong. This is wrong. And if we consider what Daniel 9:27 says, then he, Antichrist, shall confirm a covenant with many. Then we begin to understand why many in Israel will accept the Antichrist. 99-year-old Rabbi Menachem Schneerson. Now, many thought he was going to be the Messiah. He's 99 years old. Do you understand this? And they really, truly thought he was. But then, of course, he died. And they said, oh, okay, he's not the Messiah. But they were absolutely sure that this 99-year-old man, Menachem Schneerson, he was going to be the Messiah. Because he always pointed to the rebuilding of the temple as the supreme sign of the coming Messiah. So Israel will accept the Antichrist because he'll be a charismatic leader who will outwardly look, act, and speak like the Messiah they've longed for. Let's turn our attention to what will happen to Israel 3.5 years into the 7-year tribulation, the 7-year covenant, 3.5 years into it. The first activity of the Antichrist to confirm a 7-year covenant will make Antichrist appear to be the friend of Israel, but his second activity presented in verse 27 will prove him otherwise. Because in the middle, as we've said, 3.5 years in, the 7-year covenant, he will bring an end to sacrifice and offering. This statement implied that not only will Israel be present as a nation in its homeland, but also it will have rebuilt the third temple in Jerusalem on the Temple Mount where the Dome of the Rock is currently located. Once the third temple is built, a reinstatement of Israel's old temple sacrificial system will be in place. Remember, at this point, they don't know that Jesus is the Messiah. So they're going back to the Old Testament sacrificial system of offering the animals and so forth. And since Israel was restored to its homeland as a nation on May 14, 48, but to date it has not rebuilt the temple or reinstated its Old Testament sacrificial system, so they are waiting. But after the first 3.5 years, Antichrist will put a stop to the entire Jewish sacrificial system. The fact that he will be able to do this is an indicator of the great authority that he will have in Israel by the middle of the 70th seven, the authority to do as he pleases. His stopping of the sacrifice and offerings will be the first step in his turning against the Jews to become the greatest human enemy ever to confront Israel. Much worse than Adolf Hitler. Much worse. What will motivate Antichrist to stop the Jewish sacrifices in their temple? I want to talk about that for a minute. By the middle of the last 7 years, prior to Christ's return, Antichrist will turn against every form of established worship in order to clear the way for the worship of himself. He will want to be worshipped as God. Isn't that not what Satan wanted also? I want to read two sets of scriptures. Daniel 11, 36, 37. And we're going to get into this after we get through chapter 10. But Daniel 11, 36, 37. Then the king shall do according to his own will. Who are they speaking of, class? He shall exalt and magnify himself above every god. He shall speak blasphemies against the God of gods and shall prosper till the wrath has been accomplished. For what has been determined shall be done. Verse 37 in Daniel 11. He shall regard neither the God of his fathers nor the desire of women, nor regard any God. He shall exalt himself above them all. Then in 2 Thessalonians 2, 3 and 4. 2 Thessalonians 2, 3 and 4. Paul writes, let no one deceive you by any means, for that day will not come unless the falling away comes first. Paul was writing this because people were told that we're in the tribulation period. And Paul is saying, let no one deceive you by any means, for that day will not come unless the falling away comes first. And the man of sin, Antichrist, is revealed, the son of perdition. Verse 4 in 2 Thessalonians, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God, or that I worshiped, so that he sits as God in the temple of God. And this is another reference to the third temple. You see, he will set in the temple that he will have built in the first 3.5 years, showing himself that he is God.